So what I'm sharing with you this evening is our Healthy California campaign, and we have the NRDC has the most members in California of all the states, and so this is a new campaign that we're developing for California, so we'll be able to do it in other regions throughout the states. Building a healthy and equitable California. What does that mean? Next slide, please. That means we aim to advance environmental policy by building a larger movement and by educating decision makers and select communities on the public health benefits and consequences of our statewide policy. And I just want to emphasize that because it hasn't always been the priority of NRDC to build consensus and hear from communities and think about the consequences of the policies that we put in place. We've been around for 50 years. We started in California. We have a lot of, we've put in place many environmental regulations or helped to craft many environmental regulations in the state of California. And now we're mature enough to understand that we can't do this in a vacuum, that we need to partner with local communities, impacted communities, to ensure that our policies that we work on are in the best interest of everyone. Next slide. So we have almost 40 million residents here in the state, and we all need access to affordable and clean water, air, transportation, housing, and food. And in order to build that healthy California, we need our policies to work for everybody. Today, that's not the case. Black, Latino, Indigenous, and Asian and Pacific Islander communities are disproportionately impacted by dangerous pollution and the effects of the climate crisis, which we feel daily here in California. Our homes, schools, and hospitals are surrounded by nearby oil and gas wells that are exacerbating health problems like preterm birth, asthma, and cancer. Polluting vehicles are driving through low-income neighborhoods. Farming communities are bearing the brunt of toxic pesticides known to cause neurological damage. And while the pandemic drags on, hopefully we're coming into an endemic here pretty soon, but Californians increasingly rely on outdoors for exercise and mental health. And there's many people that lack access to nature. Next slide. So we can do it better. And that's why NRDC is working in California with communities, environmental justice partners, labor groups, elected officials, health advocates, and businesses to build a healthier and more equitable future for all of us. That means residents have safe and affordable access to water. Their homes are powered by clean energy, and they live, work, and play in pollution-free communities. It's also why it means we protect California's open spaces and natural resources for future generations. This is at the heart of everything that we're working on now. Next slide. So it's not about, okay, my job on a day-to-day basis is to get NRDC in the media, and we're, as an organization, we're pretty darn good at that. You see our experts in the media a lot, and that's not my main priority anymore. I connect reporters to our partners and frontline communities daily, whether it's the organic farmer that's trying to change, how California farms and get away from the industrial farming industry here, whether it's Stand LA, who's really doing some great work down in Southern California in, ending fossil fuel drilling and refining in the middle of communities with playgrounds right next door to these oil and gas operations. it's not always about NRDC, it's about who's bearing the brunt and how can we come up with solutions to the problems that are happening on the front lines. So we lift up our EJ partners and we share their stories on our website and with the media daily. Next slide. All right, so let's talk 30 by 30. And then, well, first of all, does anybody have any questions about what I've shared so far?
What is EJ?
Environmental justice.
Okay.
Environmental justice,
Partners.
needs to happen in all communities, and it can't just be the powerful that are being heard. So we're learning a lot from the environmental justice communities that we work with, and it isn't brand new. And some of our experts have done a really good job at centering that for years and decades, but not everybody within our walls. And so now we have an equity tool to ensure that all of the work goes through this screen before we, invest resources, time, expertise on anything new. We have an equity tool to ensure that we're asking the right questions from the very beginning of any new type of work. And all of our existing work is going through that equity tool as well. Any other questions on that? All right, so we'll move to 30 by 30, and I'll just, I'll start at the macro level. Scientists warn that the natural condition of, I'm not gonna really need the screen, slides anymore. Great, I like to see everybody. Scientists warn that the natural condition of half the planet's lands and waters must be protected and restored to prevent mass extinction of most wildlife species and to protect clean water, clean air, healthy forests, farms, and fisheries people depend on. 30 by 30 is a critical step towards that goal. Protecting natural ecosystems is a powerful solution to the interrelated crises of both climate change and biodiversity loss that threaten our world as we know it right now. So on January 27th, 2021, shortly after he became our president, President Biden issued an executive order to tackle the climate crisis domestically and abroad. He established 30 by 30 to help mitigate the impacts of climate change and biodiversity decline by protecting more natural areas. He directed his administration to create a report that outlines 30 by 30 that will create opportunities for communities across the country to help the nation achieve these conservation goals. In December 2021, the U.S. Department of Interior, in coordination with the Department of Agriculture and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, they released a report called America the Beautiful on how the Biden administration proposes to implement 30 by 30. And the report details how it will engage stakeholders and identify locally driven science-based solutions. And the report requires a creation of the American Conservation and Stewardship Atlas. And what that does is it collects baseline information on the amount and types of land and waters that are being managed for conservation and restoration purposes. The publication of an annual America the Beautiful each year updates on the health of our nature in America and on the federal government's efforts to support locally led conservation and restoration efforts. So that gets us to what's going on in California. I mean, the feds can't do it on their own, and California has typically been a leader in environmental policy. I mean, we created CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act before there was a national NEPA to ensure that big projects are not harming our nature and environment. Now, California has created our own 30 by 30 efforts. So Governor Newsom did it through an executive order, and that launched the California Biodiversity Collaborative of local, state, and tribal governments, along with industry, experts, and NGO representation to help achieve 30 by 30. And the state released a draft implementation plan in December of 2021 called Pathways to 30 by 30, Accelerating Conservation of California's Nature. We meet at an interesting time because over the past year, there have been all of these stakeholder meetings where the state has listened directly to farmers, industry, people like, within Nrdc, all the other Sierra Club, all the other environmental organizations are also clued into this priority. And it has been unprecedented. The governor's administration is so accessible on this initiative that it feels like they have released something and then had these public meetings over Zoom where anybody can comment. And so tomorrow is actually the deadline to give feedback on their first draft. And the folks at Nrdc have submitted our technical comments, being, as thorough as we can, identifying shortcomings, giving them praise where they deserve it, and making sure that local communities are also involved. So that's what I have about what's going on in California, and I'll just tell you what NRDC's major priorities are in 30 by 30 throughout the country. First of all, we must tackle the climate and biodiversity crises together. We can't do them separately. We can't lose our species and try to solve the climate crisis with technology. It's all so interrelated. Our planet is currently experiencing climate and extinction crisis, and we risk losing up to 1 million plant and animal species within the next decade due to human activity. Since 1970, this planet has lost 60% of its vertebrate wildlife populations. Think about that. So, number two, 30 by 30 will help protect nature and mitigate climate change. It's a bold effort building on the building blocks we rely on for human health, like clean air, clean water, food security, and flood control. So the state is taking cues from the national initiative and looking to what the Biden administration is doing with its America the Beautiful program. Third, 30 by 30 efforts must be inclusive and equitable process. Low-income communities and communities of color are disproportionately affected by nature's decline. Strategic planning and decisions made on 30 by 30 must include the voices of diverse stakeholders in the decision-making process, so we can yield a more equitable distribution of nature's benefits. Fourth on our priority list, the US must use science to establish strong definitions and criteria to protect nature. That means it has to be a data-driven process. We must establish a strong science-based definition of conservation and criteria that will yield meaningful long-term ecological benefits. And lastly, the US must support global 30 by 30 efforts. The US must support the Convention on Biological Diversity's post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework by making significant financial contributions to the global conservation efforts, by supporting international frameworks and mechanisms that compel conservation. We also must lead by example in meeting our own goals. And so think about the work that that John Kerry's doing as our international climate lead. And then I got to work briefly, almost a year, with Gina McCarthy. She was our leader here at NRDC for about a year until the Biden administration swept her away to be the domestic climate lead. So I feel like we're in pretty good hands with John Kerry at the international helm and Gina McCarthy. They're both very engaged in these 30 by 30 issues and initiatives, but it will take all of us. And that's why I was so happy when Carol brought this topic to me. I didn't pitch it to Carol. So I am really happy to share what we know and have done so far. We have blogs from our experts throughout the country and specifically here on California that I can follow up and share with you guys. But it really is an imperative that we all support the 30 by 30 framework, because without it, we're playing whack-a-mole. So if we get the data, we understand what needs to be protected, we protect it. And I think our climate future will be a lot more hospitable if we do so. So that's what I have. Any questions, any thoughts, anything that I should have commented on and haven't?
Could you give more details about the 30 by 30 in California that NRDC would find appropriate?
Well, right now it's all about figuring out the most impactful areas that need to be conserved, and that's what the pathways document is outlining. And most people, I don't think it's going to be a problem in California to get the lands and freshwaters protected. There's a lot of great people working both on conserving lands. A lot of our land here in California is already protected by the federal national parks, BLM, and state parks, but more needs to be done. And that's what this pathways document is trying to figure out. Where are the most impactful areas that we need to protect by 2030? And frankly, our biggest issue here at NRDC is protecting more of our marine environment, because we've already done a lot of work on our marine protected areas. And that was a long collaborative process, but we need more protected areas in our oceans environments. And frankly, our fishing industry is very powerful. And it's not just the family fishermen, it is industrial. I mean, family fishermen fisher folks understand that their livelihood depends on robust, healthy marine environments. but it's the industrial fishing community that's really pushing back. And they're loud and they're well represented and they're very well funded here in California. And so really that's our hugest, let's say, challenge to making sure that that we get the oceans conservation portion of it right.
With all of the publicity now about plastics and how they are so much, well, everywhere, but very much in the ocean, has that made any difference at all?
It does make a difference. And we are, you know, there's internally at NRDC, we have been clamoring for a plastics reduction campaign, and experts that work, you know, we need a team of folks at NRDC to work on it. We have 2 people right now in California that work on it, but it's not enough. And where we really need to concentrate our efforts is making less plastics, getting away from plastics. And right now, the fossil fuel industry sees in California that demand for petroleum products is going down, and they see the plastic industry as a way to use their, you know, their products. So again, very formidable, you know, formidable industry that we're taking on there. But if we don't move away from using so many single-use plastic products, we're going to choke our environment and you know, our communities.
So it's a similar problem with the agriculture, with the industrial agriculture, isn't there?
Say more, Jeanette.
Well, like for instance, how many of the almonds that are grown in California are eaten in California, or even in the United States, or, you know, other places where they have water wars over the whether or not the farmers get the water or the people in the city get something to drink. Goes on and on.
Yeah. Well, we do have a robust team in California that works on sustainable farming issues. We have water attorneys that have been trying to cure the water war issue by taking on the big water agencies throughout California. And, you know, really, I think the state of California is figuring out that we can't do business as usual. And especially under this administration, it feels to me like they could be moving faster and doing more. But I know that through our work with the governor's office and other decision makers, that they do want to address the water issue in California. I just drove last week, a colleague and I went to a ribbon cutting ceremony south of Fresno, in the middle of big ag lands, where there's a new solar park. And it's like an office park where it's kind of plug and play for solar companies to come in. It's already all been permitted and everything. But what makes it unusual is it's on destroyed fallow ag land. And we're talking thousands and thousands of acreage that is no longer viable for our agricultural community because of the water issues. It's contaminated.
Right.
It's been a monoculture for so long that it's just, the soil is no good for anybody. And yet it is sunny most of the time in the Central Valley there. So it makes so much sense. So I think built out, it's something like 25 gigawatts. I mean, incredible. Just bringing on what they did for the ribbon cutting could power 10,000 homes. And so for a year. So I think we're moving in the right direction. There's a lot of good momentum at the state level, but these powerful actors and industries have been doing things the way they want to do for a long time. And now we're feeling the effects in so many of our communities. And so I think it's reckoning.
Yeah, I would think that a lot of the farmers that are on the eastern side of the southern Central Valley, they didn't have water before the water canals were there. And they were promised more water than there is, and in perpetuity. So that, is difficult to change people's minds.
It sure is. It sure is. But I think at the heart of it, we can't, like, the younger folks are understanding that things have to change. And so I think that's what gives me hope every day, is the younger folks stepping up, taking on these hard issues, asking the right questions, getting involved. But I do know that our water system has to change. The aqueducts, when I drove down the valley last week, they were completely full. Completely. I mean, I've never seen, first of all, I've never seen the Central Valley look so beautiful, because everything's still really green, and the rolling hills. And then you see this artificial river filled up to the top. I've never seen it filled up to the top. Maybe it's just the time of year, but and then of course there's the signs along the freeway there saying, give us back our damn water. So that's all got to change.
Desalination. What is going on in California with desalination? Will it play an important part in California's water scene?
That's a complicated solution, isn't it? Because there's very rich, important ecosystems that will be affected by taking water out of the marine environment. And it's not that it's off the table. It just to site desal plants is very complicated. And if you do it right, you have to, look at all the impacts. Go ahead.
Can we get any good lessons from Israel? They have apparently been very successful at desalination. This has been going on for at least 10 years or more. Any good lessons from them?
Absolutely. I know the folks from Israel come over and talk to communities that are exploring it. And I know some of our experts have been in some of those talks and certainly want to learn those lessons from Israel. But I also think that what works in Israel off of Israel's coast, we have to make sure that it works for our California coast as well.
It's also very, very expensive.
I'm not promoting it. I'm just curious about it and what the community, the environmental community, thinks about it. I tend to lump it in with nuclear. It's like last ditch kinds of resolutions.
Another area we're very engaged in now is offshore wind. We can learn from Scotland. We can learn from what our friends on the East Coast have learned. But there again, our marine environment is so different from others. I mean, our waters are so deep. So we're looking at the floating turbines and, you know, where those make sense and how do they hook up into our grid. All of that is under discussion. Again, the Newsom administration has made a very inclusive process in moving forward and exploring offshore winds. They have or wind power. They have 2 study areas that they're working on right now, perhaps more. We're really engaged in 2 of the study areas because, you know, Diablo Canyon's coming offline, and we're going to need to replace that power. Those solar farms, you know, and offshore wind, and our, you know, us changing from the combustion engine over to electric vehicles, getting natural gas out of our households, moving to electrifying everything. All of that is very important.
It's been a big goal of the league is the move toward electrification and encouraging it of our local league. I read an article this morning from the LA Times, and it says this is about water. The Western mega drought is the worst in 1,200 years, intensified by climate change, a study finds. The extreme dryness that has ravaged the American West for more than 2 decades now ranks as the driest 22-year period in at least 1,200 years. I don't know how they measure that, and scientists have found that this mega drought is being intensified by humanity's heating of the planet. Well, of course, you know, we can believe that. Anyway, they went back, examined major droughts in the southwestern North America back to the year 800 and determined that the region's desiccation, whatever, so far this century has surpassed the severity of a mega drought in the late 1500s, making it the driest 22-year stretch on record. And they also concluded that dry conditions will likely continue through this year and judging from the past may persist for many years. I don't know if you heard that, but it's not surprising, but it's depressing.
I know. And how do you find hope after reading something like that? You know, yes, it's an important study. Yes, we're feeling it. Yes, it's devastating to think about not only my kids' future, but, you know, the next decade, what we're up against. And the only silver lining I found on that study after reading that article, Carol, that you just shared, was no one can say it's, you know, this is cyclical. This isn't something that, you know, we've lived through before. And
well,
you know,
some people are still trying to say that, but it's obviously not true. And
yeah.
They used the growth rings of trees extracted from thousands of trees to reconstruct soil moisture data from centuries ago, which is really interesting as to how they did it.
Carol, not to interrupt, you have a few hands raised.
Oh, great.
I think you might not see them because of the iPad.
I do not.
So Sonia and Cheryl, I think that was the tech challenge there.
Okay. Yeah, I thought maybe we should just start talking because we just sitting here with our hands raised.
Yeah, no.
Oh, good. I couldn't see it.
She just didn't see.
Okay. You know what? I'm gonna let Sonia. I know I raised before you, but I'm gonna let you speak on because I know, and I see the other young person had to go because she said she had to eat dinner. So go ahead, Miss Sonia.
Oh, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I just had a question for Kari about if you know about any specific actions that community members can take to get involved in the 30 by 30 plan.
Yes, not at the California level right now, but thank you, Sonia. It was like we planned this. This is our action alert on our NRDC website that where you can take action and encourage the Biden administration that let the feds know that this is important to all of us. So that's the action that you can take there. And then California will be, in the next phase of drafting this pathways document. Get a hold of the document, read it. We're going to be blogging on it as the draft, gets improved. We're going to be pointing out things that the state needs to do that aren't in their original draft. And we'll most likely have another action alert at the state level very soon. Cheryl, you've been so patient.
Thanks. I'm actually a cell and molecular biologist and biochemist. I'm an environmental scientist. I get your emails. I also get the emails from the Union of Concerned Scientists. So I just wanted to talk about a couple of the things you talked about, and then to answer the question that someone asked about desalination. So the concerns so for all of the positives that there are for desalination, just to answer your question about desalination, just so you guys know, the salt has to go somewhere, right? So, and so when you create like freshwater resources from a saltwater resource, the desalinized plant removes that salt and that's found in water, and in that product, that brine, has to go somewhere because salt is like naturally corrosive, and so those concentrated salts can be like potentially deadly to vegetation. It harms wildlife, and it even can be potentially harmful to like human beings. So there's positive and there's negative to that, and it even takes like the minerals out of water itself. So we have to be very careful with those kind of processes. So yes, water in and of itself has natural amounts of arsenic and lead and barium and all kind of minerals. So while you want to take some out, you don't want to take the good minerals out of the water. So those are things that we have to be cognizant of. You don't want to take the magnesium and the potassium and the calcium and things like that are found in water supplies that are good for us. I don't want to get too far into it, but that's kind of some of the things you want to think about. And yes, the whole process of desalination creates pollution in and of itself. I sit on the West County Wastewater Board of Directors, and these are things, if you have a wastewater plant or East Bay Mud and you're able to go on a tour of it, I would suggest you do it. San Francisco has a wonderful virtual tour. If you have a chance, go online, look at that one. It's beautiful. Teach you this process. Great thing for you to know. Something everybody needs to learn. The other thing is something that you were saying about the 30 by 30. And before that, you talked about equity. Everybody loves to use that word, but what does it mean? And especially when you're talking about frontline and fence line communities. And one of the things that I find most frustrating is when we're talking about that, is that the representation is critical and it's crucial. And the frontline communities and the fence line communities need to be at the table. One of the things that we forget is, I will just tell you, I happen to be a vegan. And one of the most frustrating things for me is when somebody invites you over to dinner. I don't know about you guys, but if you ever get invited over to a dinner party, say you get invited to a dinner party and you're allergic to something. Any of you guys have food allergies? Anybody? You have a food allergy, right? Somebody invites you over to dinner and they already prepared the dinner and you sit down to dinner and you're allergic to tomatoes and you find out they cooked spaghetti with tomatoes, right? And then they ask you after they've already cooked the dinner, oh, you're allergic to tomatoes? I'm allergic to tomatoes and mushrooms, by the way. And then you tell them, oh, no, I'm vegetarian or I'm vegan. But they didn't ask you before they cooked the dinner. So then you sit down to dinner and then they say, oh, okay, well, let me go find you something. And then they bring you a plate with a big old head of lettuce on it. And that's all you get for dinner. Now, everybody else is this beautifully prepared meal and you get a slice of lettuce. That's what it's like when somebody says they're inviting you to come to the table with equity, so-called equity, but they tell you after all the decisions are made. So we have to be careful, and League of Women Voters, same thing. You have to be careful when you use that word and you say equity and representation, but it's really not, because you invite people after the decisions are made or after you've set the agenda, and then you bring people forth. Right? So that's the whole point of meeting these 30% targets, and the decisions are made from somewhere outside of the community. And especially when you're talking about resiliency and you're talking about restoring the land in the community, when you're talking about especially the marshlands that are happening in Contra Costa and Alameda County and along the coastlands of California and the indigenous communities. I also was down in Southern California, and we were actually down in Keene, California, and in Tehachapi, and I was down in Coachella Valley. And there is the farmers are the chief ones who are the ones with the water. And what we found out is there's no water shortage per se, is who is getting the water. And the farmers are the ones who are getting the first, they're the ones who don't want to let go of the water, because most of the people in California, in that area, in Central California, are getting tainted water or toxic water from toxic wells. And those are the ones we need to be looking out for. And I would hope that the League of Women Voters are taking a stand on making sure that everyone, we almost have 1 million people in California who are drinking from tainted wells. And that is the policy that we have been, especially ACLU, have been fighting for. And I know that League of Women Voters throughout that area are also fighting to make sure that those toxic wells are removed from the water supply. So that's what, Ms. Kari, I was hoping that you would address.
I'm sorry, Cheryl, I didn't hear your last sentence.
I said I was hoping that that was a part that you would address, is that toxic water supply is happening to almost 1 million people in Central California and on our native lands. And not just that the water is there, but they're not getting access to that part, because we have corporations and farmers, the agriculture, who are holding on to the clean water supply. And we have almost 1 million people in the state of California who don't have access.
Right, right. And so it's the water that's been contaminated by the pesticides from, agricultural use. Also in the LA area and surrounding areas from oil and gas operations that, contaminating the water supply. Absolutely. And the other, we have filed lawsuits. We have water attorneys working on it. It's a problem throughout California that the rest of the, many communities around the nation will be encountering as well, but it is widespread here in California, as well as the failed state policy of partial replacement of lead lines for our drinking water. It's a flawed policy at the state level that they only do partial replacements. Anywhere there's lead lines that's delivering our drinking water, that needs to be replaced entirely. And so we're hoping that the infrastructure bill will deliver money to California to do it right. And that's also an upcoming campaign for us. We're trying to run a bill in Sacramento to get this right, but our state water agency right now is failing us by not taking the lead out of our drinking water. So
She may not have been, were you online when Kari was talking about the Stand LA group? Okay. Because that was community driven, but they have succeeded in getting LA to decide that they are not going to allow it anymore.
Yeah, I was actually working with them on that one.
Kari, do you know about there's something called the Idaho Maryland mine in Nevada County?
I don't. Is it an old gold mine?
I think so, and they want to open it up again. Yes,
And it's on a creek, of course, with a city down below.
and the Bay Area is downstream of there, and they tried to do this a number of years ago. We had a program on it, and they're trying again. And there's a draft environmental impact report, and there's only until April 4th to respond, and it pollutes our air and the water, et cetera. I can send you a link to it because I got a report on it from a friend of mine that used to live up there. But do you have people working on that
I
in the
don't, that's the
NRDC?
first I've ever heard of that. I would love to learn more.
Okay, I will send you the link that was sent to me.
Thank you.
Now, do we still have some hands up and other questions?
There aren't any other hands up.
Do we have other questions from people?
I could ask a question about, do you do work on the east side of the Sierra Nevada and out into the areas where there's been agriculture and water wars going on regularly?
You know, our water attorneys work in ensuring that the decision makers are doing the right thing at the state water board, at, you know, in the governor's office, all of that. It's been a fight for 50 years
Yeah.
for us, and a priority. And, you know, our attorneys, they have deep knowledge base. One water attorney that I work with, he's been fighting these fights for 30 years, and he is tenacious and knows it's such a complicated issue that you need somebody with that type of expertise to get in there and file the technical comments and hold people accountable. And yeah, there's a real tension with our lobbyists that want to work with the governor, and our water attorneys that are constantly holding their, the decision makers' feet to the fire. But that needs to be done.
Yep. Glad you're there.
Yeah, well, Cheryl, I really appreciate your comments. I think everybody had really great questions. I'm glad that this group of women warriors invited me this evening. I hope you learned a little bit about NRDC. And Cheryl, that's why I started my presentation with NRDC is not the NRDC of 50, 40, 30, 10 years ago. We really know to get our clean climate future right, it has to be not just people in a San Francisco office, although we haven't been in our San Francisco office for 2 years, but it needs to be a diverse stakeholder engagement. We need to learn from communities of what's happening in their neighborhoods to get the macro solution right, as well as protect communities from local threats. So and like everything we're doing right now, and it's 700 people work for NRDC, and so we often move a lot slower than we should. Where I would not call NRDC nimble. I would call it smart and tenacious and trying to get it right. But we're moving this ship as fast as we can.
The league has a lot in common with that. we study things before we make decisions, and we often move quite slowly, but we work on consensus whenever we can. And we move slowly, but hopefully in the right direction.
Well, we have to be thoughtful and not just do business as usual. Oh, we've always done it. If I ever hear anybody say, but this is the way we've always done it, I'm going to stop you right there, because we can't, I mean, we're in the predicament and crisis that we're in right now because of the way things have always been handled.
Do we have any other questions from anybody? We have a few more. Ruby, you got to unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Okay, actually, maybe jumping the gun, I had asked Carol and Jeanette that perhaps this forum would be a good place for a discussion about the current controversy about whether PG&E should raise its rates owing to developments over the years with the solar panels becoming so successful. And I thought maybe, well, actually, Cynthia Lloyd is associated with Nrdc and had sent me some material about their position, which seemed different from the position of community choice aggregation groups. But if Kari would like to say something about NRDC's position with respect to the PG&E request, not to put you on the spot, but maybe there's something that you could give us some insight on.
Certainly. Thank you, Ruby. So 25 years ago, NRDC was at the table when the net energy metering program was developed. We helped ensure that rooftop solar was affordable for everybody that wanted to put it on their roof. And now we have over I think over a million, over a million rooftops have distributed energy like that. Where we need to see more solar is in lower income communities. And folks that live in apartment or rent or can't put panels on their rooftops are paying for the people that have their own distributed rooftop solar. That's an issue that needs to be corrected. That's what our technical comments tried to address. We wanted to work with the solar industry to do something together to ensure that that our comments were reflective of a larger stakeholder group. The solar industry they don't want anything to change, and we saw an opportunity to make the system more equitable, and that's what our technical comments tried to do. And since we submitted our technical comments, we've been trying to work with the solar industry and others to ensure that that whatever the California California Public Utilities Commission comes up with, the California PUC comes up with, works for everyone. But right now, the $20 to $40 increase that people that get rooftop solar for free now, that those folks are really upset. And so we're not hard and fast on where we need to be. We just looked at what we helped develop and bring it into today's society where we really need the most rooftop solar. But now that the PUC said that they're looking at revising their proposed decision, we're just like everybody else. We don't know what they're doing, what they're saying, what's going to come out. But we're not hard and fast on where we are as an organization. We had a senior scientist that has been working on this issue for 15 years, and he's the one that submitted the comments that upset everybody. So once again, when we get media calls or anything in a public fashion, I'm sending them to the local ratepayers association, TURN, and they're looking at it from a consumer's point of view, and their comments were very similar to ours. They were not identical, but the people that are, the organization, the nonprofit that's looking out for the consumer's best interests is also in favor for an update. So we'll see what happens. It's been a very vocal and loud campaign that the solar industry has waged.
Isn't it true, though, that the highest priority should be what's best for the environment overall?
Yes.
And that means that when you're weighing everything, you got to consider, if you're de-incentivizing solar panels to make it more equitable, that won't help in terms of the greenhouse gases. So you've got to find a way to do both.
Yes.
Okay. Cynthia, do you have anything to say about it? You're muted, but you're muted.
I know. No, I mean, I just was aware that this was going on and shared this Nrdc policy paper. I don't know exactly what it was with Ruby. It's not something that I've been following closely. And I just know it's not, I feel very reluctant to weigh in because I know very thoughtful experts are weighing in, and I do have enormous respect for most everyone I've ever met who works for Nrdc. So I just figure that some smart people have put their heads together around this, but I also certainly can understand from this discussion that it's very complicated, incredibly complicated, and politically fraught. And the whole challenge of trying to start dealing with equity in a way that the environmental movement hasn't really genuinely done until very recently, or attempted to do, and puts a whole nother lens on everything, which makes these issues enormously complicated.
Right. Sonia, you had something to say?
Yeah, I did. I just, I guess my understanding is that we're trying to address equity in solar, and the problem is that people who are low income generally are having a harder time affording it. But by making solar more expensive, I feel like we're kind of exacerbating that problem in the long run.
Right, that's the conundrum there.
But is it?
But I think that a lot of lower income people, when you think about that, some of these ads and things that I've seen, they say, oh, but we're making all these new communities and we'll make sure that they're all done right so they can all have solar. But that's not the people who are being hurt by this. The people who are being hurt by this are the people who already have houses that are not capable of having solar on their roof because they're old and they don't have the electrical outlets, and they don't have, roofs and walls that can sustain it. So, and they don't have the money to put it in the first place. So it is a real problem. And so I think the fact that one group who has them already and doesn't want to be downgraded, I guess, from their current status, is making a lot of noise, whereas the other group is not. And so it's harder to know what all is going on. I think that's part of the problem.
Well, it's interesting. It almost feels as though we should have a separate environmental concerns event because we're running out of time to specifically talk about the issues involved with changing net energy metering. I think it's a separate conversation because as someone said, on the one hand, you don't want to disincentivize rooftop solar. On the other hand, the cost of electricity is way too high in the state for many people who can't afford to install solar panels on their rooftops or live in apartments. And we know that just solar farms, just doing huge concentrated solar plants is not the answer either. So I don't know, perhaps that's just a vote for if perhaps we could have another event where we specifically talk about this.
We'll look
Can I say
into it.
something? Can I say something?
Sure.
The whole thing, it just happens. And I think Sandra was on something. The whole thing that just happened. I want you guys to hear what you just said. No one said anything about asking the impacted communities what they want. And Sonia just said that because you guys keep saying what these impacted communities need, but nobody asked them. Did anybody ask them if they even what they needed as far as solar?
I think
And that's the issue. No, hold on a second. Hold on a second. This is what I'm talking about. Listen, I've had solar way before anybody even thought about it. I've had solar in my home since 2000. Because when I bought my home, I told you I'm a scientist. I'm an environmental scientist. When we bought this home here, it was one of the first things we did, put solar panels on it. Nobody was even thinking about it in 2000. And because this is what I studied in college, I was like, yeah, I want some solar panels. And so my husband even was thinking I was crazy. I was like, well, solar panels, what are you gonna do with those? And then we upgraded them. And do you know, I just got a bill in the mail. So everybody's talking about the people who have solar panels and the people who don't. And then the people who have them already on their homes are benefiting from the people who might get them. I got $1,000 PG&E bill. $1,000, even with solar. 1,000 in the mail. So I think we ought to think twice before we start making presumptions about what it does for some of us. Yes, I work at home. My daughter she's she's my youngest, right? And it's like, but the other side of it is, have we spoken to the people who are the most impacted by some of these policies? Some of them are barely trying to make it through the day, trying to figure out how they're going to pay their bills. Trust me when I tell you that their first question, because we went out and did this survey at Bay Area, at 350 Bay Area and 350 Contra Costa. And you know what the first question was? Are you going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for it? I don't have to pay for it, do I? That was the question. The question wasn't what roof we're going to pay it on. It was, is this something I got to pay for? How is this going to affect me? That's what they wanted to know. That was the first thing. The second thing is what legislation can we put into place with these apartment complexes to have it put on the roof of these apartment complexes, these duplexes, these small multi-family facilities. This is how you get to talking to people. It has to affect them. You have to get to the heart of the people on how it's going to affect them and talk to the people it's affecting. Instead of saying what we're going to do to you, talk to me about what it is you need. And so often we talk about people as if it's somebody else instead of us. This is your neighbor. This is your family. This is your cousin. It's you. I talk to people about it like it's me because it is me. It is me. I'm the one paying the $500, $400, $600,000 bill every month. So I think that when we have these conversations, and Ms. Kari, I already know you know this because I'm the one who was on that CPUC call last week begging them to see it our way, because I'm the one getting the PG&E, the ridiculous PG&E bill. So anytime you're talking to community and you're talking like us versus them versus us versus them, meaning the utilities, then you'll get people to listen to you. But as long as you're talking to people and you're imposing something on them rather than bringing people to the table and having a real conversation, like, talk to us about what's your biggest concern. And then let's figure this out together. I think that that's how you bring frontline community. That's how you bring community in. It's having a conversation rather than talking to people or at people. That's what I was trying to tell you guys earlier. And I just sat here and listened, and that's not what was being said. And young Miss Woolley was saying it. And I think everybody kind of talked over her. So I just wanted to bring it back to what the young woman said. And maybe Miss Woolley, you might want to say it again. Maybe they'll hear you this time. But that's all. Thank you.
I gotta say though, Cheryl, I think in the beginning of this event, one of the things that was talked about in Kari Birdseye's presentation was specifically this question of how do you bring more voices to the table when you're making strategic decisions. I think that was part of her presentation. Yes. that she started with. I also think it's important to not presume who's here and where they're coming from, because we don't know each other actually, or what issues we're dealing with, or who has rooftop solar, or who's low income, or whatever. We don't know everyone's professional backgrounds here. So I think we just have to sort of, also, just understand that we don't know everyone who's here. And I do think some of what you were talking about when you came into the conversation, there had been some conversation about those points when this event started. So I just wanted you to also be aware of that.
Okay,
I heard her from the very beginning. I heard Ms. Birdseye's the very beginning of her presentation, and I think that was important. I heard her talk about equity. I think that was important. And I don't think anybody should be offended by what I say. What I'm telling you is centering. If you're going to center equity, center community when you center equity. And I just wanted to bring it to your attention that the young woman just said something and everybody let it go past. I don't think this is a battle and it shouldn't be a battle, and no one should be offended. I mean,
okay, nobody's offended. Cheryl,
I understand it, Miss Carol. Can I just finish what I'm saying, please? Just let me finish my sentence, because I sat here and I listened to you guys just talk over, and all I was saying was the young woman said something, and you guys just you just kind of talked over what she said, but she did talk about equity. I wasn't assuming anything about anyone else. I just brought back around to what Ms. Birdseye said at the beginning of her presentation about equity. And then the young woman said something about equity. And all I said was brought us back to the fact that when you talk about equity, when you talk about the community, ask the community. That's it. That's it.
You've made a very good point. Sonia, do you have a comment? Because I promised all our speakers that we end promptly at 9, and we've just gone over that, but we had a little delay at the beginning. So do you have anything to say about it? I mean, Cheryl made a very good point. Do you have anything to say beyond what she referred to?
Yeah, I don't know. Thank you so much for acknowledging me. I don't know. I'm also a little bit tired too, though. So
okay. I want to thank everybody. This was a very lively discussion, especially at the end, and we will look into having both sides of the presentation, maybe after the PUC comes up with their next round of what things would be, because right now it's in flux, it sounds like. And Kari, I want to thank you so much. This generated a very, very good discussion on many topics. So thank you so much for being with us.
And one last thing, Carol,
yes,
before we close out, I also think, Cheryl, in terms of centering community, when we circle back, if we have time to talk about the question of net energy metering and what the CPUC arrives at, if there are organizations that you think should be involved in the conversation when we talk about it, I think you should send those organizations, to Carol and Jeanette, and because they help to run these programs, and so they can look at some of those organizations and see who can be brought in to broaden this conversation. So I think that's also, I don't want what you said to die. So I think if there are organizations, please let us know and let them know.
And these meetings are open to people coming in, so we would be happy to send them. An invitation to join us. Thank you, Kari. Thank you, everybody. Very lively, thoughtful meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.